Hello, friends, and welcome to Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly podcast designed to help mainstream Texans of faith understand the legislative process and help you engage with public policy in the great state of Texas. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness. And y'all, I know there has been a lot happen in the last 2 weeks. The opening of the Texas legislative session, MLK Day, a presidential inauguration, and all of the news that comes from it, a snow day or two. It has been a lot. And the Texas Impact team has been and will continue covering it all for you. Learn more about how you can get involved on our website at texasimpact.org. Make sure to check the Action Center to sign up for a team and bookmark the events page to make sure you take advantage of all of the opportunities to come see us in Austin or throughout the state. And make sure that you're subscribed to Texas Impact's YouTube channel to follow along with the legislative session through Ledge TV. Next week, we look forward to seeing 300 plus of you all as the United Women in Faith come to Austin for their annual legislative event. We'll have content from that event next week. And y'all, this is an important step. With a record number of women of faith convening at the Capitol and friends, we are going to need a lot more of that in the weeks, months, and years to come. So get ready, sign up, prepare to speak out, and make sure you invite a friend to join you. For today, we are excited to welcome Texas Impact's Climate Action Fellow, Becca Edwards, to talk about the president's recent executive action removing the U.S. from the Paris Agreement. So with that, I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation with Becca Edwards. Joining us for today's conversation is Reverend Dr. Becca Edwards, Texas Impact's Climate Action Fellow. Becca, it's been a week. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed, Scott, to be honest, but I'm glad to be here talking to you.
Inauguration Day, snow days, presidential executive actions. There has been a lot going on. I can't imagine. And I didn't even mention the beginning of the Texas legislature. So yes, it is a crazy time. And we're going to talk about a little piece of that. And we're going to talk about more over the coming weeks. But Becca, you focus on climate issues for Texas Impact. That has certainly been in the news during the first week of this new presidential administration as President Trump signed an executive order removing the U.S. from the Paris Climate Agreement. You wrote a blog about that on the Texas Impact website this week. Before we get into the executive action, remind us what the Paris Climate Agreement was and why it's important.
So the Paris Agreement is an agreement that came out of the negotiations at COP, or the Conference of the Parties, in 2015. And as a reminder, the Conference of the Parties is a gathering that happens yearly of about 150 parties to the UNFCCC. So backing up even further, the UNFCCC stands for United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And that is the structure or the body that gathers to negotiate on how we're going to approach a response to the climate change crisis. So it was through those gatherings that the Paris Agreement was developed, and it was signed in Paris at the 2015 COP. And that is the document that refers to 2 degrees Celsius as the goal for limiting global warming that we hear so often. So the goal is to limit global warming to 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And the document also says that a better goal is 1.5 degrees Celsius. So it sets a quantitative target for limiting our global warming that we rally around, and then we make our plans around for climate mitigation as the individual parties that are part of the UNFCCC.
And I know there have been a lot of actions, a lot of effort made toward living into that agreement over the course of the last couple of years. I don't expect you to have that entire list memorized, but in what ways have we been living into that agreement and working towards those goals?
So just in the last couple of years, which is when I have been part of this work, for instance, in COP 28, which was held in Dubai, UAE. That was the first time that we codified or made a goal to transition away from fossil fuels. And so that's kind of the major need as far as mitigation is an energy transition away from relying on fossil fuels. There's no real two ways about it. That's something that will need to happen if we're able to limit the amount of global warming we're going to see. during the last COP, which happened in Baku, Azerbaijan, in last year in 2024, the conversation was around climate finance. So climate finance is a mechanism for more developed countries that have benefited from fossil fuel exploration and use, like the United States, to contribute financially to developing countries and like the small island states so that they can do climate adaptation activities or respond to climate impacts that are already happening, and so that they can contribute to the global effort to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. So those are the two big things we focused on in the last 2 years at COP. And then in the interim, we've been focused on the nationally determined contributions. And that is another mechanism that comes out of the Paris Agreement. So each party needs to come up with their own what they're willing to do to move the needle forward on mitigation and adaptation. So the U.S. and all the nations that are part of the agreement was required to release new nationally determined contributions by February of this year. And the U.S. announced their NDCs in, I think it was December of 2024.
And what kind of things were included in that?
The goal, so the nationally determined contributions that the U.S. Released in December, the main goal was to reduce emission. The stated goal was to reduce emissions by a given percent. I want to say it was like 55%. But one of the things that climate advocates were disappointed by in that was that there were not a lot of specifics about how we were going to go about that reduction.
Got it. And before we get into the actions from this week, talk to us about why this is important, especially right now, right? We're seeing so much in the news about climate disasters. Why is this especially important to be talking about now?
So we've known that climate change was one consequence of our reliance on fossil fuels. That knowledge has gone back decades. I think in the 70s is when it started to become sort of a theme in conversations like on Capitol Hill. But well before that, scientists were aware of the connection between greenhouse gases, fossil fuels, and global warming. So the awareness of this problem is not new, but one of the things that is new is that we are starting to see major impacts in the United States that scientists are able to say with some certainty have been made worse by climate change. And so a couple examples of that this year, a Hurricane Helene, which, as you know, devastated the western North Carolina area with devastating flooding. That's a prime example of one of the impacts we expect to see in a warming climate, which is increases in extreme precipitation. Another example of a climate impact that we've seen this year is the fires that are actually still happening in Los Angeles as we speak. Increases in wildfires is another consequence of climate change because of drought and because of higher temperatures, both which make conditions more likely to have fires. And so, whatever started the fire, whether it was lightning or a power line, the reason it is so devastating and so hard to control is due to climate factors. So we're seeing these impacts, and I think most people are starting to understand just how much trouble we're in. And so it's really important. This is an important moment for us to have a conversation about what we need to do to mitigate our greenhouse gas emissions and to start transitioning away from the use of fossil fuels, because the kind of impacts we're seeing are just the beginning of what we stand to experience from a warming climate.
I'm going to have you put your clergy collar on for a second. You've done a really good job with your doctor title in the first half of this, but why specifically should people of faith care and be paying attention right now?
So I always say that climate science is a tool that helps us love our neighbors better. And so as Christians and as many people of faith, many faith traditions call us to treat others the way we want to be treated, and to look out for our neighbor, to help the marginalized, and to look out for the vulnerable. And climate change is one of those justice issues where the people that suffer the most are the ones who have done the least to cause the problem. And so as people of faith, we care about people having access to the things they need to live and thrive, to have healthy, safe families, and climate change is something that puts all of that at risk. So I see my faith as a major driver in my care for creation care and my interest in mitigating climate change.
That'll preach. It's like you've done that before. Speaking of putting things at risk, I think maybe we can agree that the executive action signed this week could put many things at risk, but certainly puts at risk our participation in the agreement. Talk to us about President Trump's executive action this week, removing us from the Paris Agreement, and what it means and what will happen as a result.
So I guess, first of all, it hasn't come as a surprise, right? He mentioned this a number of times during his campaign. And I think some of us held out a small glimmer of hope that it wouldn't go this way, but of course it did on day one, just after the inauguration. But like I said, it didn't come as a surprise. It does take, once the order is signed, it takes 1 year for the process of removing us from the agreement to be complete, which means we will continue going forward participating in the COP process as we have in the past, which means possibly the intersessions and COP 30, which will be in Brazil this year. So that work continues. The climate advocacy work continues. What it means, though, is that the U.S. Is not a leader on the global stage when it comes to responding to climate, and that is a real loss in credibility for us. It's a loss in a leadership role, and it leaves an opening for another nation to take on that mantle of leadership that we have held in the past, which is disappointing. I think we had some real successes in the last administration when it comes to climate mitigation and to energy transition, and I think we were a pretty reliable partner in some ways, and to lose that position of responsibility and respect is a big blow to the U.S.
That said, the work doesn't stop, right? We can continue working on the goals of the agreement, even if the federal government is not a part of those conversations, right? What does that look like?
Well, absolutely. So in the U.S., we have a kind of a unique situation where we have subnational governments that have taken on a significant amount of climate work on their own, and that work continues. The federal government is pretty limited in the ways that it is able to stop the work on climate that's going on in city and state governments. So there's a coalition called America is Still All In that was formed during the first Trump administration, the first time we pulled out of Paris. And it's a coalition of governors who have signed onto this document saying we're moving forward on climate mitigation, regardless of what our federal government says. And so the cities that make up that agreement, that represented by their governors, make up, I think it was 65% of the population and a similar proportion of the GDP. So a significant section of the American economy and population is still moving forward with climate action, and I expect that work will continue and grow. And another thing that's a high point, given the need for us to secure this energy transition, is that some of the policy and some of the incentives for renewable energy have really taken root in the last 4 years, and that industry has been very successful in expanding. People are excited about renewable energy, electric vehicles. People are noticing big changes in their electric bills and things like that. There's significant opportunities for reliability of the electrical grid that are tied to renewables. So I expect that some of the public sentiment around renewables and EVs is going to drive the market towards expanding that energy transition, even in spite of what happens at the federal level.
This is off topic, but I was thinking about it this week while there was snow on the ground and my kids were, sledding down hills and that kind of thing. The power stayed on this time, which I thought was lovely. Is that due in part to renewables?
It is. Well, there's a couple of things. Uri, of course, is the storm that we all think of when we talk about losing power during a major winter storm. Uri was unusual. It was a little bit different than this storm in that the temperature was statewide in the single digits Fahrenheit, which is extreme in every sense of the word. So our oil and gas infrastructure didn't perform well given those extreme cold temperatures, but So there have been some changes made on that front since that time. But one of the reasons we were able to avoid rolling blackouts or service interruptions during this most recent winter storm is that the solar and battery storage resources, as well as the wind resources, performed very well. You may remember right before the cold weather set in, we had extremely high winds the day before, and that allowed significant renewable generation from wind. After the storm came through, the sun came out, and that allowed solar to pick up as well. So our renewables helped significantly in keeping our grid stable, even during that period of high demand.
I love that. I love having power when it's cold. So thank you, renewables, for that. You're mentioning the role that state and local government can play, even when the feds are out. What does that look like if state and local governments are taking this seriously?
Sure. So state and local governments, they don't have the policies that they set are easily seen by residents, so they have a lot more accountability. Things like implementing the new methane rules on the state level are really important, which limits the release of the greenhouse gas methane into the atmosphere. Things like managing transportation, providing a robust public transportation network's another great way, and that has many co-benefits beyond climate for air quality and justice and all sorts of things. How you manage your parks and rec departments, how you manage your city and state vehicle fleets, all of these there's a number of different ways. It's even some that don't seem like they're directly tied to climate and the environment issues, that if you have a really robust climate action plan, like the city of Dallas has, for example, you can make a big difference on your energy use and your emissions in most of your operations.
We are coming up to the close of the second week of the Texas legislative session. I know you've got things you're watching during the session from a Texas perspective. Talk to our listeners about what you're watching and what do you think is possible during this session.
Sure. So I mentioned methane earlier. Representative Hinojosa has a couple of good bills out about methane mitigation. One is about limiting methane emissions and flaring on public land, and one is in requiring new wells that are drilled to have a methane capture plan. So those are both great bills that would help us move towards meeting the requirements of the EPA's new methane rules. And there's also a few bills out there that are more challenging for us because they do things like place additional burdens on renewables that new renewable projects. So extra fees, extra siting requirements, extra website requirements. And those requirements aren't really made in response to some need to protect public safety or some other interest of the local community. They're really just made to place additional burdens on renewables in hopes of limiting their installation. But what we know is that, especially in West Texas, rural communities are in favor of renewable installation because they get a significant return on their investment in form of taxes and other benefits for schools and other community services. So hope to be able to leverage some of those voices in our conversation with our elected officials this session.
Love that. If folks want to get involved, I'm sure that you have opportunities for them to work on issues like this. Anything you want to plug today?
I sure do. So if this is something that interests our listeners, they can sign up to be on the climate action team. We meet weekly to talk about issues that are relevant in this moment, strategize how we can talk to our officials about it, share information and resources. And we do cover policy at all levels of government, all the way from state to federal to international. So if you are interested in learning more and you want to start working on your understanding of how the policy at the different levels works together, I would encourage you to check that out. And you can find more information on our website.
Love that. All right, Becca, thanks for the time today. Anything else you want to hit before we close out?
No, thanks. Thanks for having me.
All right. It's been fun. I look forward to seeing you very soon and many of our listeners at the Capitol in the weeks to come. Becca, thanks for everything, and we'll catch up soon.
See you soon.
Hope you enjoyed this week's conversation with Becca, and I hope you're ready for what's to come. I hope to see you in Austin at one of the events during the legislative session or on our weekly Marching Order Mondays program with our rapid response members in B. Moorhead. Make sure to sign up for all of it at texasimpact.org. Y'all, your voice is going to be important. The voice of people of faith is going to be important, and I hope you are mentally preparing yourself to use it and that you're inviting some friends to join you in this journey. Use the resources on the Action Center page and invite your friends to join a team that interests them. If you have questions about any of it, please reach out at scott@texasimpact.org. While you're on the website, the new year is a perfect time to sign up to be a member of Texas Impact. Your membership supports this podcast and all of the work to engage Texans of faith to advocate for a more just and equitable Texas. So with that, I think it's time to close out this episode. So remember, the world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.
Weekly Witness is hosted by Scott Atnet, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is B. Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact, people of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.